So now we're going to continue our quest into finding fish, where fish live and why. We talked about food earlier, we talked about protection, and so now we're going to talk about comfort and fish sex. 3 things fish need for comfort: water temperature, oxygen, and the effects of weather. Let's start off with temperature. This is the one that really guides fish in their seasonal life cycles. We're going to reuse the largemouth bass as an example here. Other species will vary off of this. So when water temperature is below 55 degrees, we're not going to see a whole bunch of activity in largemouth bass. They're kind of lethargic. They're just kind of hanging out. Yes, they do eat, but they don't really chase down their food. They're literally waiting for the sushi conveyor belt to come by and deliver something literally right in front of their nose. They open their mouth, suck it in, and eat that way. They're not very active until about 55 degrees. And as the water starts to warm up, they go into the pre-spawn gorge. They have been doing this the entire frickin' winter. They're bored. They're tired. They want to do something. And just like humans, when that thermometer hits about 50 degrees, 55 degrees on campus, what do you see? People out in Dunn Meadow, t-shirts, shorts, smiles. People are enjoying this warm weather. Oh, what a nice day. You see homeowners getting out with the rake, starting to clean up the yards. This is exciting. It's no longer winter. It's no longer February. When the water temperature gets to about 60 degrees, fish start to think about breeding. And the spawning period starts. This starts with the females coming into shallow waters looking for a place to build a nest. The old, large females are the first to go in, and they will usually look for a nest that in deeper water. And the perfect nesting spot would be, something with 4 bedrooms, 2 bath. No, I'm sorry. Something around 10, 12 feet deep, a sandy bottom, not a lot of silt, or certainly not muck. They'll use their tail to fan out a depression, usually about 18 inches, 2 feet in diameter. And they will work to clear that area of any large rocks, twigs, sticks, crayfish, undesirables, that type of thing. Make it nice and clean. And then she will sit there and lay her eggs. She'll go off and start to kind of rest and relax after her ordeal, and slowly start to eat, not aggressively. The male will come into the nest and then fertilize the nest and then guard the nest. He's there for the duration. He's just kind of hanging out. He's keeping everything out of the nest except his eggs. And we'll see this in bluegill, where you'll have this big bull bluegill. I mean, these guys, old guys are sitting there, guarding their nest, and they've been doing this for years and years and years, and they're pretty big. Sometimes this is the only time you will see them. They will literally die defending their nest. Anything that comes into the nest, they will kick out. When I was a kid, I would use like a sponge rubber spider and cast right on top of the net and let it sink after it become waterlogged. And I would watch the big bull bluegill, watch the spider falling down into the nest, goes out, grabs it, obviously with his mouth, takes it outside the nest, spits it out, and returns to the center of the nest. And I did this for, well, it seemed like hours. It was probably only 15 minutes. But each time, he would never eat it. He would only take it and push it outside of the nest. Largemouth bass are going to do the same thing. They're going to protect their nest. For some fishermen, this is absolutely the prime of life. This is the best time to fish. Other fishermen kind of treat this as let the fish do what the fish need to do so that there's more fish later to fish for. And they don't mess with spawning species. The DNR fisheries biologists are kind of mum about this. It's kind of built into their equations for maintaining healthy fish populations in their managed lakes. If you're a private landowner with a lake, that's something that you're going to have to decide if you want to let the fish, some privacy, or if you would allow fishing during that time. You can catch fish, take them off the nest, release them, and they will go right back to the nest. So some people will argue that you can catch the fish as long as you're practicing catch and release. It's not harmful. Remember that under the best circumstances, we probably still have a fairly high mortality rate of caught fish. So this is up to you. This is kind of your decision if you want to fish during the spawn. Certain species, maybe a nuisance species that you actually want to take advantage of the spawn to catch as many of the nuisance fish as you can to reduce their numbers. So after they have finished spawning, the eggs hatch. You have these little fry, as they're referred to. The adult will stay in the nest, kind of guarding the younger fry up until a point. And then he's kind of like, I'm done with this, and he goes wandering off. He's also incredibly hungry at this point because he hasn't really been eating while he's been guarding the nest. So he'll leave and start to go back to regular feeding. As the water temperature warms, it starts to approach 70 degrees. Feeding really starts to increase. Between about 70 to 75 degrees, you get into what's referred to as the post-spawn gorge. And this is where the fish just kind of go crazy. There is so much food in the water. I mean, it is like smorgasbord every day. Every place you look, there's something to eat. And fish just go crazy. Where did all this food come from? Yeah, fish are cannibals. They gave birth to this. They're eating their children. There's just so much food, I can't help it, And so they'll go into this gorge, really put on some weight. You see some very fast growth rates. This goes on until everybody's full or the food starts to run out. And in this area, as the summer progresses, water temperatures continue to rise. Once they hit about 80 degrees or so, fish will start to kind of decrease their feeding, become more sluggish. They'll find cooler places to hang out. Sun becomes a real factor as the elevation of the sun in the sky increases the penetration into the water column. They'll start seeking out more shady areas, under boat docks, under boats. The South Shore of lakes, that is almost in perpetual shade. Fallen trees, deeper water depths, where the sun doesn't penetrate as deeply. Any place where they can find some shelter from the sun. Remember, fish don't have eyelids, and they can't dilate their pupil the way humans can, or mammals for that matter. This is a illustration of a thermocline. A thermocline is the boundary layer between warm water and cold water. If you've ever gone swimming in a lake during the summer, you could be sweating as you run into the lake, and you're out there treading water, and sweat's still pouring off of your forehead, but your feet are cold. And you literally can feel that someplace around, I don't know, your knees, there is a very distinct differential between warm water and cold water. That is the thermocline. And fish can use this to find comfort. If they're a little bit chilly, they can move up into the warm water. And if it's just getting too freaking hot up here, they can expel some air from their swim bladder and decrease their density and their buoyancy and sink down below the thermocline and into the cold water. In a winter, the opposite happens. You'll have the cold water on top, then the thermocline, and the warm water on the bottom. And the same thing. Fish can go deeper to find that warmer water and avoid the cold water. However, we get into this spring and fall turnover. So we're coming out of winter into spring, heading towards summer. So as this cold water sitting on top of this warm water, it will reach a certain density level where it is heavier. The heavier water is on top of the less dense, warmer water in the bottom, and it starts to sink. And it's called a turnover. And we have this in both the spring and the fall. And basically, the thermocline goes away, and these waters just start to mix and become one. This is very important in the natural life cycle of a body of water, in that nutrients from the bottom of the lake get brought up and mixed in to the water at the top of the lake, and with increased sunlight, photosynthesis, that natural life cycle thing gets kicked off, and plankton starts to bloom, and minnows start to eat, and fish start to have fish sex, and then there's baby fry fish, and this life cycle just keeps perpetuating. This is probably one of the more revealing pieces of information I have found in books on fishing. These next two slides illustrate the relationship between oxygen and water temperature throughout the seasons. I'm not going to go through each individual plate here. That would be excruciatingly boring for you. I'll let you do this on your own. But let me point out that in the early spring, we can see the warm water up here at the top, and these little circles representing dissolved oxygen are all up at the top. The cooler water is just right below the warm water. So that would be your thermocline right up here. You can see in the bottom, there's no oxygen. So all the oxygen has been depleted here, and it's all concentrating up to the top. Guess where the fish are? If we drop down here to late summer, we can see that the warmer water is up here at the top, the cooler water down here, and dissolved oxygen is pretty well mixed throughout the water column, and the fish are pretty evenly dispersed throughout the water column. If we go into fall, we can see that the oxygen at the bottom of the lake has been depleted, and the fish are concentrated, more towards the upper reaches of the water column, with a pretty good mix of temperature and oxygen. In the late winter down here, when we would expect fish to be hanging out at the bottom of the lake because it's nice and warm, such as in late fall, we find that there's no oxygen in the deeper, warmer water. But all the oxygen, or what little is remaining, is concentrated up near the surface. And that's where we're also finding the fish. Fish need oxygen. I was down at Lake Monroe, this was back during the 90s. We had really hard winters. We would typically have about 1 week of sub-zero, not sub-freezing, but sub-zero temperatures. It was absolutely wonderful. And Lake Monroe would completely freeze over. And I went down to Fairfax Beach and walked out on the ice. It was very windswept. So the ice was just absolutely crystal clear. And I suddenly realized that I was walking upon fish. And literally there were hundreds, probably thousands, of gizzard shad frozen in the ice. It was like going to an Asian market and just seeing these frozen fish, stacked in there, just hundreds of them, thousands of them. And this was an example of winter kill, that death by asphyxiation, oxygen starvation. As the fish were getting near the surface, trying to suck in all the oxygen they could, because it's been depleted at depth, they literally just get caught in the frozen water and are frozen in place. As the water temperature is warm and that ice starts to melt, you release a whole bunch of freeze-dried food, and so that becomes a great, very easy source of food right after the winter thaw. Remember that gizzard shad have a very, very high or very low tolerance to oxygen levels, and so they are they're the first species that will go in a real hard winter. Speaking of temperature, to kind of summarize the spawning activity of largemouth bass, 60 degrees is kind of the trigger point. Yeah, it might be 62 degrees, 58 degrees. It's around 60 degrees. Typically, in this area, we'll see that between April and May. I have seen a spawn in June, years ago. In the north, the spawn will last about 30 days. In the south, it'll go about 30 to 40 days. As I mentioned, the older fish will spawn first. Younger fish, younger females, there's literally a pecking order. The older you are, the deeper you get. And the idea is that the deep nests are going to be more protected. So you'll find like a first year mother spawning in a foot of water, which is not real good because there are tons of birds that go around and feed on fish eggs. The average female can lay about 2,000 to 7,000 eggs per pound of body weight. So if you're looking at a 3 pound if you're looking at a 3 pound bass, that could be up to 21,000 eggs. Of these, about 10 will ever reach 10 inches in length. So if we can surmise that from each nest we're going to get about 10 surviving fish out of those thousands, only about 10 of them are ever going to get to be 10 inches. A 17-inch largemouth is going to weigh around 3 pounds, and it can eat a 10-inch largemouth bass. So if you want to talk mortality rates, infant mortality rates, there's about a 0.4% chance that you're going to make it, to adulthood if you're a largemouth bass. The 1 in 25 million chances of ever catching a largemouth that is 10 pounds or above is debated. This information comes from basssource.com, which is an absolutely fabulous website. They have all kinds of information on here. One thing that we're starting to see in bass, well, it's actually been going on for quite a while. Private lakes, sportsmen's clubs, which have been around for at least 100 years, they are growing largemouth bass. They will actually hire lake managers, fishery managers, to come in and formulate the lake to be the most productive for producing large fish. They'll get the predator to prey ratios just right, good mix of aquatic vegetations, eliminate any competing predator species. There's just all kinds of techniques that they do this, and these people make some fairly decent money. Hint, biology majors. And they're growing very large fish. We're seeing the same thing in the deer hunting arena, where landowners, property managers will plant food plots specifically for deer to produce very large racks, antlers. So this is managed wildlife, care. So springtime, we've got the pre-spawn gorge, and then the spawning period during the summer. We're going to see fish disperse throughout the lake. As we mentioned, shade becomes much more important. You will see fish feed early and late during the summer. If you're out there at 1 o'clock in the afternoon and you're not catching anything, except maybe a few juvenile bluegills, what do they know? There's a reason for this, because as the water temperatures warm and the sun intensity increases, fish are going to switch to diurnal feeding, basically sunrise and sunset. So maybe that's when you should be concentrating your fishing efforts. During the fall, we get a pre-winter gorge. Fish are going to be more shallow. They're going to be hunting. This is absolutely a favorite time to fish for a lot of fishermen. It's after Labor Day. People are back in school. People are back at work. You don't have the crowds, and you have absolutely gorgeous, gorgeous scenery, as the leaves start to turn. And there's very few boaters out. I mean, not very many people, are very active during the fall. Summertime, absolute total circus. Wintertime, bass are going to be seeking warm water and oxygen. Most people don't fish for bass during the winter, but you can catch bass in the winter. The further south you go, the less term winter means. In Florida, you're fishing for bass year-round. It might be a little slower during December, January, February, but it's still there. I mean, because it just doesn't get that cold. Bass are going to behave differently in Texas than they are in Minnesota. Okay, let's get into oxygen. Actually, let's save oxygen for the next video.